Right. So how far do your particular belief systems go when you think about God? I mean, do you believe in a literal creator, or is this more of a metaphor to you as far as how the cosmos
Well,
came
I'm
to
not
be?
sure where metaphor touches reality.
Right.
Like, metaphor is an extraordinarily powerful tool for dealing with reality. And it isn't obvious to me that our reality isn't a lot more metaphorical than we think it is. Like, I'm much less convinced that our standard scientific viewpoint, let's say the Enlightenment scientific viewpoint, is in any means complete. I don't really believe it is. I think that what we don't understand about the universe is vast in its expanse. For example, we don't understand consciousness, not even a bit. And people have been hitting consciousness pretty hard from a scientific perspective in the psychological and biological community for about 35, 40 years. And I don't really think they've got anywhere with it. I've read a couple of books that I thought were reasonably good. I read one called The User Illusion, which I thought was good. Jeffrey Gray had a pretty good book on consciousness. I didn't like Daniel Dennett's book at all. I think it was, as his critics said, consciousness explained away. There's lots of other things we also don't really understand the problem of the observer. Like phenomena, extant phenomena seem dependent in some strange sense, and this is without having to make any allusions to the mysteries of quantum physics, which is always a dangerous thing to do. Extant phenomena seem to require a subject, a conscious subject, in order to have any describable existence. And that's another thing that we don't really know what to make of. And so I think and so you were asking me about my beliefs. I've spent a lot of time studying religious stories, period. But if you study stories deeply enough, first of all, we think in stories. Okay. We organize our lives in stories. We organize our perceptions with stories. There's no escaping from them. And stories have a structure. And the structure has a grammar. And you can tell that because you can tell the difference between something that's a story and something that isn't. Even though there's a diverse range of stories, there's something about the set of all stories that makes them stories. And when you look at what makes the set of all stories, you're in the religious fundament. That's what you're in. And the religious stories they're meta stories. That's one way of thinking about it. So the hero myth is a very good example of that. And the hero myth is true insofar as human beings are true. Now, when I talked to Sam Harris, we augured in on the definition of truth, but I think Harris was wrong. He was after me because I refused to use true in the same manner that scientists use it. But true is a much older word than scientifically true. There's the true of an arrow's flight, and there's the true of your heart, and there's the true of your aim, and there's the true of metal. And true is a very, very richly connotated word. And the hero myth, which is the idea that you should voluntarily confront the unknown despite your vulnerability, and that will lead you to redemption, let's say, because that's how you would phrase it religiously, that's true. It's as true as anything we know. It might be more true than anything we know. And that's a strange thing, because that's an indication of where metaphor, because the hero myth is a metaphor, that's a place where the metaphorical touches the real. And I don't think we understand that at all. And I don't think the atheist community. The thing that bothers me, I would say, about let's call them the celebrity atheists, is that, as far as I can tell, they've never read any of the people who would give them a real run for their money. Like, if you're going to play in this domain, you have to read Dostoevsky. It's not optional. You have to read Tolstoy. That's not optional either. You should read Mircea Eliade, was he Romanian? I think he was Romanian.
Romanian, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and who the scholar of religion, who's a genius, and who wrote like 20 books, and including a history of religious ideas, which is an absolutely profound set of volumes. You should read Erich Neumann, who wrote The Great Mother and the Origins and History of Consciousness. And you should read Jung, and he has about 20 volumes, not counting his seminars. And you should read Nietzsche as well. And that's just a good starting place, you know. And it isn't obvious to me that the celebrity atheist types have done their damn homework. These people were smart. Like, I've read a lot, and I've read a lot of science, thousands of papers and hundreds of books, and they weren't easy books. I know when something's well written and when the person's reading it, who's writing it, is above and beyond the ordinary in terms of their intellectual ability. And Jung, for example, was an incalculable genius. He was as smart as Nietzsche, maybe smarter, and that's pretty much as high as it goes. And if you don't know that literature, you don't know what you're talking about. It's as simple as that. And if you don't know what you're talking about, then, well, like Dawkins, for example, is very well armed on the evolutionary side, on the evolutionary biology side, but he treats Christianity, for example, as if the highest forms of Christian thought are encapsulated in fundamentalist, like American fundamentalist Christianity. Well, that's just palpably absurd. So that's a straw man problem. And this is a big problem, the straw man problem. So, and there's another problem too, which is, as far as I can tell, the fundamental presuppositions of our culture are metaphysical. So, for example, the notion of natural right? The notion of natural right is predicated on the idea that there's something intrinsically valuable about each human being, metaphysically valuable, let's say. And there's no evidence for that as a factual statement, right? Factually, we're all unbelievably diverse and different, and perhaps there's no reason to treat a human being any different than you'd treat a rat, let's say. The animal rights activists have made that case. Well, but we have these metaphysical presuppositions at the base of our culture. The doctrine of human rights, for example, that's predicated on the idea of intrinsic human value, and that's fundamentally embedded in a religious context. That grew out of Judeo-Christianity. And the thing is that, it's really functional. Societies that believe that and act it out, which is the best indication of belief, they really work. Societies that don't believe that get tribal and murderous pretty damn fast. And then you can also look at people's behavior. Like, if you're having a conversation with a committed atheist and you don't treat them as if they're a divine locale of consciousness engaged in the heroic myth, then all they're going to do is get irritated and angry and not even notice that. So I would say, well, they say they don't believe, but they act as if they believe. So, and for me, it's action. So when people say, well, do you believe in God? I think, well, what the hell do you mean by that? Like, what? That's a really complicated question. And for me, it's like, well, actions speak louder than words. And that's, I suppose, an existentialist perspective to some degree. The belief is best reflected in action. But I think the celebrity atheist types, they believe that the West and its humanistic presuppositions are a consequence of the Enlightenment. And that also staggers me because someone like Dawkins, for example, and Harris to a lesser degree, they pride themselves on their evolutionary approach. It's like, okay, fine, let's play that game. How long ago was the Enlightenment? 500 years. Who cares? How long have human beings had a religious instinct? 150,000 years? 300,000 years? As far back as language, we don't know. Maybe as far back as the creation of fire or the taming of fire, which would be some millions of years. We don't know. There's a religious instinct. It's a human universal. It's like, you're going to take that seriously? You're going to hand wave about the fact that our ethics were derived 500 years ago. When none of the scientific evidence suggests that. There's evidence for the emergence of ethic-like behavior in chimpanzees and wolves and rats and all sorts of animals. It's like, what, their enlightenment? That's grounded in the Enlightenment as well? It's not serious, this stuff. And it's not good because it needs to be taken seriously.
Right. So I hear most of that. If someone is to claim that a God has created the cosmos, should that not be tested? Isn't that a scientific claim that can be tested?